Hello everybody, Dr. Carmen Bryant, Psychological Health Consultants and Services with my program Redefining Yourself. Remember, this is a program that was developed for women that are thinking of leaving, needing more education, or have left and are recovering from domestic violent relationships. And my main focus is narcissist abuse recovery or narcissist abuse. I've received many emails and many comments on the YouTube channel. Thank you guys so much for sharing your story. Miss Keisha, is it Keisha? Miss Keisha, thank you so much for your stories. Everything that you're saying on here in reference to what you experienced with the narcissist that you were affiliated or associated with really just confirms a lot of things that I've said in these videos. And thank you so much for your comments and really confirming what I was saying. You know, I'm so sorry that you have to go through, and for all of you, I'm really so sorry that you have to go through what you've been through or going through in your recovery. And also, I think I have a comment here from, let me look, Miss Jenny Girl, and you asked me to do a video on karma. I'm going to address that when I come on live because when you're looking, you know, especially when people ask a question like that of me, a lot of times I know that you are hurting and not just hurting, you're still recovering from what has happened to you. And really a lot of times it's about trying to get back, or I hope that you heard as much as I heard, you know, and so I'm going to address that when I go live, if you don't mind, and please join me when I go live. I keep saying that I'm going Periscope Live, it's just that my schedule has not permitted me to do that, and I've been really studying the empathy, and so I wanted to go and do a part 2 to the empathy and empath because I felt a little rushed yesterday because I had to hurry through the video before my clients walked in, and so I just wanted to expound on that a little bit just in case I missed something, but I just wanted to go in and just expound on that just a little bit. So this is part 2. For those of you that are new to my YouTube channel, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for your support, the comments, the emails that you're sending. I'm really honored. Thank you so much for sharing your stories and trusting me and sharing your stories. If you have not already, please join me on my YouTube channel. It's under Dr. Carmen Bryant, Overcoming Narcissist Abuse. Subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you can be alerted whenever I go live, whenever I post a new video. And if you have not already, or if you're following me on my Facebook page under Psychological Health Consultants and Services, thank you guys so much for your support. Please share the videos. You never know who this is going to help. And, you know, the more the videos go out, the more people that are tuning in, the more people that are emailing me. You're finding out that many of you have been in a narcissistic relationship, and a lot of you have been in domestic violent relationships, and in those domestic violent relationships you're now finding out you know, the methodology or the MO, we say the mission of operations, the MO that many of the abusers use, and now you're finding out that a lot of them were narcissists. You know, and there's a scale of narcissism as well. But I wanted to go back and address, just expound a little more on empathy and empath, where I can slow down and take my time a little bit. And I wanted to go and talk about the spectrum. And we're talking about a spectrum or continuum. You know, we're talking about, you know, if you look at it from this point to this point, if you're reading from left to right, you know, if you're looking at it in a curve, you know, if you look at it from this point to this point. On one end, you have little or low empathy. In the middle, you have normal empathy. And on the end, you have hyper empathy. And where most people find themselves on an empathy spectrum is usually in the middle. You can, you know, teeter back and forth. No one is perfect. You teeter back and forth, and you have the ability to connect with people. So empathy is the ability to connect with people, and I think I read this yesterday, the types of empathy, which one is the affective empathy, which, and I'll let you know that this comes from the articles written by Dana Fenton, 2014, November 6, 2014, is Emotional and Stress Management, reviewed by their medical team, and it's under Steady Health, Exploring Hyper Empathy Syndrome. And in the DSM, no, even with complex PTSD, that's not a part of the DSM, but it is something that's being explored and being studied, and as well as the hyper empathy syndrome is something that is being explored. And remember, with narcissism, with these disorders, well, the hyper empathy, a lot of this is still being researched by neurobiologists, by neuropsychologists that are studying the brain, that are studying the brain waves, that are doing tests, administering tests, and doing research on, first of all, narcissist, and of course, empathy. And as you know, there are different spectrum of different things. You do have pathology, and when you start talking about the pathological or pathology, let me pull it up. When you start talking and using that terminology, when you're talking about pathology means to describe a person or their behavior as pathological means, and this is from Collins English Dictionary, it means they behave to an extreme or unacceptable way in society and have a very powerful feelings in which they cannot control. Some of them deal with compulsive disorders or compulsions, or they're governed by compulsions, put it that way. And so to go back, and we're talking about empathy on a spectrum. You have affective empathy, which refers to sensations, emotions, and feelings when we respond to the emotions of another person. This type of empathy can include mirroring what that person is feeling, or feeling stressed out when we detect another person's anxiety or pain. Cognitive empathy refers to a perspective taking in perspective, which means we have the ability to understand and relate to other people's emotions. And I'll give you an example of empathy. Many of you that are on here, those of you that have that desire to help other people that have been through domestic violence or have been through narcissist abuse, you understand what they feel because you've been through it and you know how painful it is. That's pretty much on a normal spectrum of empathy, and you want to help people. For example, I want to help people to get that information out there because I understand what you feel like, because I too am a survivor of narcissist abuse. And having said that, I understand some of the feelings, some of the emotions that you have been through. Each experience is a different experience. Each person that you dealt with is a different person. But narcissist abuse, when you're dealing with a narcissist, you're dealing with an individual that's abusive, and they have the same characteristics. Many of you, when I talk, many of you chime in and put the comments or email me and say, wow, it's like you're reading my life like a book, because we all have similar experience with different people. The things that they do, in general, when we talk about it, is very similar. And so we can empathize with each other because of the fact that we've had that experience and we know what we feel like. And not to the extent where I know everything about you, because your situation is still unique to you, but we empathize. And in turn, we want to help other people, get them this information to console them, to let them know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. So that is empathy, normal empathy. And then being a clinician, one of the important things for clinicians or those that are in the mental health field is to be able to balance empathy where you're not over empathetic, because if you're over empathetic with the stories that come in, you have police officers, you have medical personnel, you have professionals that work in mental health, counseling, and you have to, what we call is burnout or fatigue, when we have become over empathetic to a point where we begin, and they're also what's called, oh my gosh, what is it called? When secondary post-traumatic stress. And what happens is people come in, and if we don't learn how to manage, or if we don't know how to take a break, if we don't know how to unwind, or to unwind after counseling, which I do a lot of times after counseling, I may sit here and take notes, or may watch TV a little bit, or unwind, go into my private office and unwind from a lot of the stories that have been told. And a lot of the stories that are told, because I am a trauma professional, it goes from child sexual assault to child trafficking, to human trafficking, to the most vicious sexual abuse that you can go through, to husbands beating their wives, and wives assaulting their husbands and children, and all these stories that we get. What can happen is compassion fatigue. That's also a syndrome that you usually use with people that are in the helping profession, and you can go to hypersensitive, and if you don't watch it, that scale will go over to the hypersensitive, meaning that now we don't know how to disconnect with another person, and we're taking their pain where we can actually feel it. I've never experienced that, but I have experienced burnout, where the story's coming in and you're helping so many people, and sometimes we don't know how to separate ourselves from that person, where you're trying to do more work than they're doing because you can see the light, and I'm telling you, you start burning out to a point where you stop feeling. And when you get to a point where you burn and you burn out and you stop feeling, it's very vital that in a helping profession that you have to take a break, whether it's a day off, whether it's a vacation, so that you can work through this burnout. And this is a phenomenon that happens in a helping field, where our skill goes over to hypersensitive and we burn out because we're constantly helping people that are hurting. They come in with raw emotions. And my dissertation for my doctorate, I actually talked about that as well, is secondary trauma, burnout, compassion fatigue, where the professional in the helping field will begin to take upon the post-traumatic stress, PTSD, from listening to the stories of people who are experiencing post-traumatic stress. And so you do have that scale that are moved, and we have to, but on that scale you still can get counseling, you can get help, to balance that scale back out. So it's imperative to be able to balance that scale out. And so if you're moving from the normal empathy to the hyper empathy spectrum, if you're moving over to the hyper empathy, a lot of that you will notice that you may experience situations such as, let me read this. This is from where was I at? Let me go back. Okay, so let me go back before I finish that. So as I said in the last video, empathy is developed by the interaction with our caretaker, with our environment, and it also states, a lot of researchers and neurobiologists stated that some people are predisposed, chemically predisposed, genetically predisposed to specific type of personalities or a specific type of wiring, chemical wiring in the brain. That's why some people are born with the autistic disorders. The autistic disorders mean a chemical dysfunction, empathetic problem, and you'll know even on the autistic spectrum, you'll find more severe to more highly functioning autistic individuals, but they usually have a problem with empathy and relating socially to people. And then you come back on the regular empathy scale, where you have the low empathy to the normal to the hypersensitive empathy, and as I said before, the caretakers, if you have a caretaker that may have been autistic, or you have a caretaker that may have, the children look at facial features, they look at how they're learning and they're mirroring the facial features when you're smiling, when you're laughing, to make them laugh, so they're mirroring what you're, when you're angry. I saw a little child on Facebook where they say, make the angry face, and so they're learning to mimic facial expressions. The affect is the display of the face. Some people come in and they have a flat affect where, they say they're happy, but they look like this, or very blunted. Even when they talk, they're very monotone when they're talking, and so they're telling you that they're happy. And so that lets you know that that something is going on. Either they're depressed, but I usually have to listen to the fluctuation of the voice. You're telling me that you're happy, but your affect is displaying very blended emotions. You have no emotions. Your voice is very monotone, and so I have to mark that. That's something that I have to watch. But that is also a part of learning how to associate with people, watching their facial expression, listening to their tone, interacting, and even experiences, as we were talking about in the video, even with experiences, to know what is painful, the death of a loved one, what it felt like for yourself, so you're able to empathize with people. And there's a difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is being able to stand off from someone and feel sorry for them, and empathy is being able to put your feet in someone else's shoes to feel their emotions. And like I said, it has a scale. And so if you have caretakers that do not show, they're not affectionate, they don't show, they're not, they don't believe in touch, or they don't know how to touch, they don't know how to comfort, and so the child is mimicking, and so they don't know how to put an affect with emotions, so they're learning, so they're on the lower end of empathy, because they're not learning how to internet and connect with people like that. Sometimes they don't know socially, they're socially awkward because they don't have that experience, or their caretakers did not provide, or even environment influences that as well. On top of that, those that may have been traumatized or hurt have learned to guard, and so the empathy may be low, they're guarding, they have been wounded, or this painful, I can't connect, so there are different reasons. There are a lot of, and they're still being studied, because everything can't be pinpointed, but there's a lot of reasons why you would be on the lower end of the empathy scale. And so going to the other side of the empathy scale, which is the hyper empathy, let's see here, going over to the, a little bit, too much of a little bit can be damaging, and too much of a lot of it. So too much of good and too much of bad, or too much of a little bit and too much of too much of a little bit and too much, you eat too much, you can get fat. You don't eat enough, you can starve. So there is no one is perfect, and so there is a medium, the scale moves back and forth to be able to balance in between that empathetic scale. And so this is a regular empathetic scale. On the other end, empathy can be destructive, meaning if it goes to the hyper empathy syndrome. The hyper empathy syndrome is something that's being studied, is not implemented in the DSM yet, but based on some of what the researchers were saying, or researchers, those that were studying, the hypersensitivity is something that may be introduced into the manual eventually as they're studying and getting more data. But those that are have hyper empathy syndrome, or those that are called empaths, those are the ones where they talk about having, and this is on disorders.org, mirror neurons that cause a person to mirror the feelings and the emotions of another person at a high intensity that someone not affected by hyperempathy. Higher intensity than someone not affected by hyperempathy. In some cases, people are affected by hyperempathy may actually experience physical reactions to another person's pain or emotional distress. Remember, we talked about that, I talked about that yesterday. And so over time, if not treated, hyperempathy syndrome can drive a person to compulsively help others at the expense of their own needs. If it continues, and that's what we're talking about, pathology. Pathology meaning that it has not been addressed and it becomes a problem. Distressful, could be a compulsion, to a point where they can develop what's called social phobia. Social phobia, if you're dealing with the hyperempathy syndrome and it's never addressed for years at a time, it can cause feelings of anxiety to develop in social situation, and if left untreated, these feelings can evolve into full-blown social phobia. And so people that are living with social phobia develop preoccupation with making a good impression on others, regardless of whether they know them or not, according to Israel Journal of Psychiatry and Related Sciences. In effect, someone with a high capacity for empathy becomes especially sensitive to negative emotional expressions in others. They become very sensitive to people's facial expressions, to their tone, to their body language. Over time, the sensitivity towards negativity starts to warp one's self-identity and overall quality of life. These developments lay the groundwork for social phobias to take root. And so, let's see, some of the harmful effects, if that hypersensitivity becomes destructive, let's see, some of the signs, let's see here, can take form in the following: feeling emotionally drained much of the time, unexplainable mood swings, erratic energy levels, frequent headaches, feeling a need to withdraw from social situations. So that's one. So there's another one where it talks about, let's see, um, we talked about being able to feel the pain of others. Um, we're actually feeling the physical pain when they see someone else suffering. Let's see. Sometimes the line between yourself and others can be blurred. And some of the examples that were given were empathy on overdrive. That hyper empathy is codependency. So codependents lose themselves in their relationships. They're consumed by their desires to solve other people's problems, control them, or meet their very needs, usually to the detriment of their own needs. Over time, codependent individuals become angry, lonely, resentful, having sacrificed their own needs and feeling for too long, yet still cannot detach. And in some cases, codependency may point to a deeper issue with sex, love, or relationship addictions. Another one is enabling. People sometimes mistake enabling for empathy. Out of care and concern for a loved one, people may enable destructive behaviors such as substance abuse, loan money, provide food and shelter, and make excuses for an addict. While these behaviors may look and feel like empathy, they prevent the addict from experiencing the natural consequences of their behavior, thereby perpetrating the addiction. Another one is helicopter parenting, similar to enabling. Helicopter parenting have helicopter parents have the best intentions. They love and care for their children and want life to be smooth for them, but sometimes they go too far in the name of empathy, doing their child's homework, resolving disputes between friends, trying to shield them from possible danger. And although well-intentioned, this style of parenting produces young adults who lack confidence and decision-making ability and who remain dependent on others. Another one is professional burnout. We just talked about that. And this is in certain professions, having too much empathy can lead to burnout. Physicians, nurses, police officers, clinicians like myself, therapists, have to balance and have a healthy empathy with their ability. So that helps us to have the ability to do the job that we do, being able to separate ourselves from the people that we're helping, not being over empathetic, meaning that we try to resolve people's problems and step in their shoes to a point where we're doing all the work and they're not. So really what you're doing is you're hurting the person more than you're helping the person. And if the physicians felt bad knowing patients would be in pain after surgery, they would not make great healers. If they couldn't turn off or at least limit their empathy, 1 week on the job could be debilitating for both personally and professionally. And this is the professional. People pleasing. The desire to make others happy may appear to be driven by empathy, but often motivations behind people pleasing are based on selfish desires to be accepted. People pleasers often end up feeling angry or resentful because they've been giving too much of themselves to others. Remember, I just said that. That's a part of that. They may base their own self-worth on how well they are liked or how much they do for others, and in the process of becoming someone else's doormat. Okay, so it's good to keep empathy in a healthy check, meaning that if those of you that are on one extreme or the other, and you recognize it, you become, hopefully some of this teaching will help you to recognize, where on this spectrum that you are. And the greatest advice that I can give you is get to counseling to help set personal boundaries, which for those that have operated on that hyper empathy side of the spectrum for a long period of time, to you it may feel uncomfortable learning boundaries, learning to say no, learning to separate yourself from other people, because it feels like that you're doing people an injustice, that you're supposed to be like that, and you feel selfish that if you don't do that. But you have to learn to set personal boundaries. You have to learn what nurturing relationships look like. You may not know what a healthy relationship look like, and many of you that have come out of narcissistic relationships do not know and may not have an experience with healthy relationship with good boundaries. Let's see what else. Hyper empathy can be a sign of an underlying mental or emotional problem and can also increase the risk of substance abuse and other risky behaviors. If you find yourself inching toward either unhealthy extremes along the empathy spectrum, talk to a therapist or a treatment center that can help you set boundaries and resolve unhealthy relationship patterns. So remember, even before, empathy is a part of human, that's what makes us human, to be able to connect with other people, to feel what they feel, to get an experience. Your life experiences help you to, even cultural experiences help you to have more compassion or empathy toward people, to understand people, to connect with people. Let's see, another thing that I was looking at. Here are some signs. Here's some characteristics and characteristics. This is exploringyourmind.com. I think I was on this before, and this was published January 28, 2018. Try to see who the author is. Give me a second. Alrighty. But here were some, let's look here. Here are some behaviors of hyper empathy. Well, the hyper empathy syndrome, which is not, remember, is not an actual diagnosis yet. But here are some behaviors that, for those of you that clearly have identified yourself as empaths, here are, or those that are wondering, on the hypersensitive side of the hyper empathy side of that spectrum. You may experience a breakdown of your identity and social skills, and it's common for you to develop other disorders with compulsion and psychosis. Tend to have mood swings going from deep depression to histrionic, that dramatic or unbridled happiness. You're patient and dependent. You find yourself dependent on other people. They may want to, or you may want to solve everyone's problems to reinforce the image that they want to project of being valuable and needed. They, meaning the person that's hyper empathetic, they may want to solve other person's problems to reinforce the image that they want to project of being valuable and needed. So they have the need to be needed. They need constant interaction to validate themselves by doing favors. If someone tries to set boundaries on them, they feel hurt and rejected. Also, they're often overprotective and undermine other people's autonomy, meaning your freedom to be yourself. The excess empathy gives them serious trouble being productive at work. They feel like nobody understands their altruism, their need to support and help others. And last but not least, you often see them move from excessive empathy to resentment. They've suffered so much disappointment that they end up isolating themselves and submerge themselves in rage and despondence. So let's see. What else do I have over here? Okay, let me make sure I give you everything that I had on one site. Let me go on the next one. So let's see. And this that I'm about to read comes from Psychology Today. And of course it says, like I said earlier, that genes can influence the absence of various brain chemicals that influence how little empathy a person has. So now that's on the other side of the spectrum, low empathy, okay? Let's see. They were talking about brain imaging and what they found on brain imaging, and found out the brain structure and chemicals can affect personality, empathy, behavior, and consequently the behavior in relationship. As advances are made in the field of neurobiology, we're coming to learn more and more what the Institute has already believed, that there are a lot of biology behind personality development issues such as personality disorders. Genetics and neurobiology are proving that behavior associated with narcissism, borderline, antisocial personality disorders, along with psychopathy, has as much to do with brain wiring and chemistry as it does with behavior intent. And so what some of the researchers and professionals also said, is that when you come off the scale of low empathy and you go onto a new scale of no empathy, zero empathy or no empathy. Not all people that have no empathy are narcissists or have narcissistic personality disorder. They've also found those people with borderline personality, and those are that diagnosis has a problem. Usually they experience problems with regulating their mood. They do have problems with empathy. They cannot relate to people, and they deal with a lot of problems dealing with rejection, abandonment issues, and they have, this fluctuating idealization to rejecting, but their moods go up and down. And so coming off of the spectrum of empathy and going on to a new spectrum of no empathy problem empathetic problems, or empathetic no empathetic or empathetic problems, you run into other person that now you start to become pathological, meaning that there's a problem. Some are wired, chemically wired. There are problems with the brain. And let me look, there was something I was reading here that I found very interesting. Let me look for a minute. Let me find it. Hopefully I can find it. I have like all these windows. I would turn it around and let you see it. Okay, so going back onto the empathy scale, it does talk about, and this is a PhD, so a clinical psychologist, a PhD, Rick Newart, and he talked about the low empathy associated with borderline personality. So you can go into, when you go into low empathy, you can run into personality as you're coming off the scale. So remember, you have the empathy. So not everybody that has low empathy has a personality disorder. And in that scale, you can get counseling to help to regulate that. When you become pathological and you go off the scale into personality disorders, now you're dealing with empathy problems or disorders of empathy. And one of them happens to be borderline personality. And borderline personality, they did brain imaging and found the activity in the brain regions that support empathy, and it showed that they had, those that had borderline personality had a marked illness caused by unstable moods, we know that, but also had a problem with empathy. Let's see here. It's such a long research. Okay, so there's a link that found that people with high borderline personality traits showed a decreased use of neural activity in two parts of the brain, the temporal parietal, hopefully I pronounced that right, junction, and the superior temporal sulcus, two brain regions implicated to be critically important during empathetic processing. Okay, let's see what else it says. Borderline personality is considered one of the most severe and troubling personality disorders, and it makes it difficult for those that have borderline personality to have successful friendship and romantic relationships. And so, see, those that have problems with empathy doesn't necessarily mean that they have narcissistic personality disorder. But then when you go onto that new spectrum of empathetic problems, you run into personality problems. And then we go to situations such as, or problems with narcissistic personality disorder, where they have lack empathy, and lack the ability to connect with people's emotions. They mirror other people's emotions. They mirror you. So remember when we was talking about normal reactions, normal process of learning empathy and building onto that, the building blocks, and that ability to mirror, the children are mirroring the expressions of the parent and the caregivers. Well, a narcissist has a problem. They mirror, but they only mirror because they figure out, okay, you're supposed to cry when it's sad, and I'm going to mirror your emotions. And so they're like a robot. They try to mirror, they try to copy or mimic the human emotions, but they lack empathy. They don't have the capacity to empathize for people. And this is on that scale of empathy. They don't have the capacity to do that. Something has happened, whether it's trauma, But they could also, according to the research, may have had chemically predisposed or genetically been predisposed for narcissistic traits or narcissistic personality disorder. Another thing that a researcher here has published, well, someone has published in the medical news today, and this is by Anna Sendawi, and this was published November 7th, 2016. It also suggests that there's a possibility that the hormone oxytocin, the low functioning, let me see, when there's low levels of oxytocin, it also may affect the ability to empathetically bond with people. And so here it says, and this is medical news today, oxytocin is the hormone that's produced in the hypothalamus, which is a very small part of the brain that controls many of our body functions, including appetite, thirst, sleep, mood, and libido. And so this hormone is secreted and stored in the pituitary gland. It's a pea-sized organ in the base of the brain that regulates many vital bodily functions such as metabolism, physical growth, sexual maturation, and reproduction. Oxytocin has also been nicknamed the love hormone because it is secreted when we form bonds with a romantic partner, our children, and even our pets. It is released during sex and childbirth to aid and facilitate reproduction. It is also secreted when we stare into each other, into the eyes of our loved ones, and when we hug them. The love hormone has also been shown to regulate social behavior, and it increases feelings of trust and prompts pro-social and moral behavior. So oxytocin reduces aggression and stress levels. So new research strengthens the link between empathy and oxytocin by examining how patients with low oxytocin levels respond to empathy tasks. And oxytocin, it says oxytocin increases empathy. So oxytocin levels have previously been linked to empathy, and some studies have suggested that increasing oxytocin improves cognitive empathy and helps with social adaptation in patients with autism spectrum disorders. And so let's see. But there's a reduction in empathy in the empathy in neurology patients with low oxytocin. This here, indicates that there's the ability to regulate empathy with, and it could be the oxytocin to regulate the empathy levels. Now, remember, when you're dealing with a person with narcissistic personality disorder, they don't have the ability to bond to people. So that research is an indicator that there may be a low oxytocin functioning, but that personality disorder, which is a pathological, pathological, meaning that there is a dysfunction where they cannot, their behavior is inappropriate in society, their behavior is dysfunctional, they have a low functioning. And remember, everything that you see is a facade. These individuals have a very low self-esteem, very high anxiety levels. They're not, but they can't connect with people, empathetically connect with people. So hopefully I clarified some things from the last video. I wanted to just expound on that a little bit because I didn't want anyone thinking that if you're on that empathy scale, from low to, when I said 0, I meant that's a whole nother scale, but from low to hyper empathy, to let you know the scale of empathy, and that with implementing mental health services and counseling, learning how to regulate, you need a good counselor that knows how to teach you how to have some type of normalcy within the empathy spectrum, learning good boundaries, learning with relationships, because people have been affected by their experiences, but to learn boundaries, and hopefully many of you that are on this channel are learning new things about yourself, even coming out of abusive relationship, being able to identify where you are at on the empathy scale, and know on this empathy scale, that does not mean you are narcissistic or have narcissistic personality disorder. That's a whole different scale, okay? Some people do have narcissistic tendencies or narcissistic traits, and a lot of that may have come from coming out of families with narcissistic parents or siblings, or being in a relationship with a narcissist for a long period of time, and you have picked up some traits on how to manipulate or how to survive within that relationships. And so you have learned to mirror, or you have learned and picked up some of their traits. And so some people can misidentify you as being a narcissist, when in reality you have just picked up some traits, and you may be acting on those traits and those, as a way of survival, or a way of what you have learned being with this narcissist. So hopefully I've done some clarification. Hopefully you've learned something, and I just wanted to do a part 2 to expound, because I kind of had to rush through the video yesterday, and I really don't like rushing through videos. I like taking my time. But I thank you guys for tuning in. Please email me, Dr. Carmen Bryant, DrCarmenBryant @outlook.com. You are also, please, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is Dr. Carmen Bryant, Overcoming Narcissist Abuse. Hit the subscribe button and hit the bell so that you can see whenever I upload or whenever I come on live. And I've been promising to come on Periscope Live, meaning that I have to kind of start over again, and I have not had the opportunity to do that, so please forgive me. But I will be on live on YouTube. Give me a day or two, maybe this evening, or maybe tomorrow evening, or maybe Sunday evening, whenever you guys are relaxed. I'm going to come on, so hit the bell so you know when I come on live. And I'm also on Facebook. I come on my professional Facebook page, which is Psychological Health Consultants and Services, and I do come on live there as well. And I'm open to questions, whatever questions you have. Go look through the videos. You can ask me whatever question you want to ask me. Just don't ask me my weight, okay? But you can ask me whatever question you want to ask me, okay? And I'm open to those questions. And please share these videos. You never know who you're helping. You never know who needs to hear this. Sometimes you don't know that a person is going through domestic violence, nor do you know that they're going through narcissistic abuse. And some of you don't even realize that you were in a narcissistic relationship. And now, after watching these videos, some of you are binge watching. There are other people that also teach about narcissistic abuse. One of the ladies that I like to follow, her name is Angie Atkinson. She also is a narcissist abuse specialist. She's a life coach. There's also Mr. Quinn Holliday under Associate Direct, ASSC Direct. He's a male survivor of narcissist abuse, and he's also a life coach. And there are many other people like Kim Saeed. There's Melanie Tonya Evans, who also is a life coach that teaches about narcissist abuse and recovering from narcissism. And hopefully you have learned something from the channel. Please, send me your comments, send me emails. Let me know what you're learning. Let me know, and I will be back live to come talk to you guys, and I'll start recording more videos next week, but I will be on live between now and Sunday, so I can chit chat with you guys over the weekend and see what's on your mind, see what you've learned from these videos. Let me know. Thank you guys for sharing your stories, and as my friend always says, go and be great, and I really mean that.